Hello, this is King Rex coming at you with a second video on the Electoral College by Mr. Beat I'm reacting to. Um, I watched this a while ago, but I watched the beginning parts of it again, but I figured I'd just do a reaction without watching through the whole thing. He does state right out that this is an opinion video, like his previous opinion video, and he does admit that it is propaganda. It's not the basic propaganda is when you're trying to use media to convince someone of something. So it's not always a nefarious thing. Um, Once again, Mr. B seems like a nice guy, but I do disagree with him quite a bit on the Electoral College, so we'll go through the video here.
When I was born, my parents voted to call me Matthew Beat. Most of you watching probably would vote to call me Mr. Beat, but if you are one of the many people who disagree with me about the Electoral College, I don't think it's good. But if you think it's good, perhaps you would vote to have other, meaner names for me. My video dunking on the Electoral College is my most disliked video on my channel. 32% of people who have watched it have disliked it. Sad to say, many of the dislikes came from people who didn't even bother watching the whole video. The whole video is 19 minutes long, and just 14 minutes after I posted it, it already had 11 dislikes.
So he had 11 dislikes with people watching roughly 14 minutes of his video. It doesn't take 14 minutes in that video to get to the point where you would dislike it. How many likes did he have in those first 14 minutes? You're going to have it happen where people watch part of a video, don't agree with it, dislike it, and turn it off. And you pretty much get the gist of his entire argument well before you hit 14 minutes in the video. Plus, a person could have finished watching it and taken a dislike away. You can always do it on a video. So, it seems kind of like a shallow complaint, and like, okay, that video was watched by thousands of people, and 14 disliked it that didn't finish watching the entire video.
Way to keep an open mind, Internet. Even recently, Electoral College defenders are still very angry at me for this video, leaving me comments like this. You are an idiot. The Electoral College is to protect the Republic. If you do not like America, then leave. It's very simple and very clear. You have no idea what you are talking about. And this.
Good grief, I just found your channel. This video is far worse than I could possibly have imagined. You spent 19 minutes on the Electoral College and never once attempt to explain why it was established in the first place. We're left thinking it had something to do with racism and white male privilege. This is pure propaganda.
Well,
actually, that comment kind of makes sense. He never does say why it was established, really, and he'll agree the video is propaganda, but like it wasn't established out of racism and stuff like that. It was established as a compromise because the smaller states wanted to have some voice. And if you look at the states that were the smaller states at the time, they were the states that didn't really have as many slaves, like Rhode Island, Connecticut, Vermont, New Hampshire. Those were the lower population states. The higher population states, because even at the time, New York and Virginia had slavery. I mean, I meant to say Pennsylvania, of course, Virginia did, everyone knows that, but yeah. So it's the states, like Massachusetts was the only state that didn't have slavery at all, and the states in the New England states had the lowest amount. But those were the small states that got more voice in the government because of the Electoral College.
well, first of all, it was propaganda. I'm not sure if it was pure propaganda, but yeah, the whole point of the video was to promote the idea that the Electoral College was bad. But here's the thing. I try to keep an open mind, and I always love a good challenge. I read the comments because I wanted to see if Electoral College defenders could present some good counterpoints to what I was arguing. Sad to say, most of the comments were just repeating very tired talking points or ad hominem attacks. Oh.
Well, wouldn't you argue that when he makes a funny voice reading someone's comment, that's kind of an ad hominem attack? I mean, he's not attacking what the person said. Like the first guy that said you're an idiot, yeah, that type of comment should just be ignored if someone's going to start out in that manner. But the second comment, the guy made some reasonable points that he ignores and makes a funny voice. So that's kind of an ad hominem. Because I mean, and yes, there are bad comments. You're on the internet. You're going to get negative comments, but not most of the comments. I went through the comments too. I left a comment. Most of the comments were pretty reasonable, and they weren't people just attacking him for things other than what he said in the video, not anything else.
Oh, look, they are again referencing a quote attributed to Benjamin Franklin that I first heard in middle school. Thanks.
Democracy is not freedom. Democracy is two wolves and a lamb voting on what to eat for lunch.
Look, the analogy is way off here. Think about it. It'd be more accurate to say democracy is three lambs voting on what to eat for lunch.
He completely misses what the analogy is saying. You wouldn't want a group of two people to be able to vote for what's best for them, but really bad for a third person. Basically saying that their democracy can be bad if you get a large enough group to gang up on everyone else. In fact, we actually do see this in the South after Reconstruction until the Civil Rights Era, where the one lamb was the black people and the two lambs were all the people that were taking their rights away. So yes, democracy can cause some negative issues, which is why you have, with the setup of the way the government was, to have some checks and balances against, pure democracy and mob rule.
Oh, by the way, there is no evidence that Benjamin Franklin ever said that. The quote has been attributed to him only for about the past 22 years, and according to my research, was first printed in the Los Angeles Times in 1992.
Even if Benjamin Franklin didn't say it or not, which I would say don't know, it doesn't change the idea behind it.
Regardless, I did want to try to respond to the comments that made the best points. At the same time, I will be responding to this video by a dude named Andrew from a channel called Don't Run, Walk It Out Productions. Walk Run? Hold up. Don't Walk, Run Productions. I'll admit it was one of the better videos I have come across defending the Electoral College in recent years. Andrew clearly knows his stuff. Unfortunately, he thinks I don't even know the definition of republic.
Let's get rid of the Electoral College, which the United States has been successfully using for centuries, because a guy arguing with a puppet doesn't understand what a republic is.
In that same video, he is criticizing I gave the definition of republic, but here it is again.
It should be noted that what this guy's probably referring to, if you watch the first video, you will notice he doesn't know the difference between a republic as a form of government and a democracy as a form of government. A democracy is when you have a government that the people vote on everything. There's no representatives. All a republic is a government with representatives. And generally, the government is you vote in your representatives. This is why he's saying he doesn't know what a republic is, because if you watch the video, it sounds like he has no clue, and he gives some textbook definitions that sometimes really aren't that great. But a republic is a representative government. It's not a straight democracy where every person would have a vote on every issue that came before the people. You'd have no Congress. You'd have issues that put forth and everyone could vote on them.
A republic is a type of government in which supreme power resides in a body of citizens entitled to vote and is exercised by representatives responsible to them and governing according to law. But first, if you are watching this video as an Electoral College defender, as someone who likes the Electoral College or at least thinks it shouldn't go away, first of all, thank you for watching. Second, you are a rare cookie, meaning that most people don't dare get out of their echo chambers. They'd rather just always watch stuff that confirms their own biases.
I would generally rather watch stuff that's against what I'm saying. Like, I watch some of his videos and agree with them. If I agree with something, I'm not going to do a response to. But the reason why I watch a lot of his videos, I actually do like him as a content creator. He seems like a very nice guy. I don't personally know the guy from Vlogging from History, Chris, but he vouches for his character as a person. And he seems like a really nice guy too, so I kind of think, well, these two guys probably are. I doubt that they both get together and try to fool everybody. But yeah, I like responding to things that I don't agree with. I don't mind hearing other opinions. and at least he presents them generally in a really well thought out manner. Now, if someone's acting kind of neurotic when they're saying something I don't agree with, that's a different story.
This is why I am excited to once again be sponsored by Ground News, a news platform that makes it helps you see which news story. Better way to stay informed about current events
Skipping
around
that.
the world. Check out Ground News by going to ground.news/Mr. Beat. The link's in the description, yo.
Dude, you are an idiot. It's called tyranny of the majority. It's simple. I'm sorry if you can't comprehend it.
You really didn't give a good argument against mob rule. Fair enough. I guess I need to expand on the mob rule bit because I didn't say much about it in the first video. First of all, saying that democracy inevitably leads to mob rule is a slippery slope fallacy. I think
Actually, we'll go back just a second so you can see that if you want to read that. No one is saying that democracy will automatically lead to mob rule. They're saying what we're doing is we're putting in some safeguards against having mob rule occur. It'd be like saying that if you unlock your house, if you leave your doors unlocked in your house, you're more likely to have someone walk in and rob the place. Or if you leave the car unlocked, the windows out, someone's more likely to get in your car. So does that say that, okay, so you're saying if I don't lock my doors, it means I'm going to get robbed. There's no point. That's not going to happen. So there's no point in locking my front door. So basically, it's not saying that democracy will lead to mob rule. It's just saying that the Electoral College was set up in such a manner that we wouldn't end up with mob rule as a protection against it. Not a, if we don't do this, it's going to happen no matter what. So it's really not a slippery slope fallacy because he's not understanding the reasoning behind it. At least it sounds like he's not understanding it.
slippery slope fallacy. I think majoritarianism, an idea which says that the majority of the population is entitled to a certain degree of primacy in society.
Now look at that. The majority of the population is entitled to a certain degree of privacy in society. That doesn't mean an absolute privacy in society. The Electoral College just cuts it to a certain degree where almost always the majority gets to elect who the president they want is anyway. If there wasn't an Electoral College, these elections would probably go a little differently too. You can't assume that because, maybe more people would vote in big states like New York, Illinois, California if they knew that every vote would be pretty much, if you vote in those states, you're going to vote Democrat. Texas is going to go Republican. So maybe if you did that, maybe there would be a little bit more voting and it would actually change the outcome. Presidents would also campaign a little differently. You would probably go out to California as a Republican and try to drum up some support in some of the areas that do have conservatives, even though they're vastly, overruled by the majority that aren't. So basically, the Electoral College is not against majoritarianism because it still leaves a certain degree of primacy to the majority of the population. It's only in rare cases that it doesn't go to the majority.
Is a good thing. And you know what? The majority of folks out there also think majoritarianism is a good thing. So, see what I did there? Odds are you think majoritarianism is a good thing too. You tend to make choices based on majorities, don't you? If the majority of people tell you Whataburger is good, and it is, you give it a try.
That's not really majoritarianism. That's you listening to other people's opinions and you're trying it, but doesn't mean like if the majority of people say Whataburger is good, then you have to like it and have to eat it. That would be majoritarian. That's the majoritarianism that he's talking about. Like, if they said that the best fast food restaurant that serves burgers in the country is Whataburger, therefore all other hamburger restaurants should be shut down and everyone has to eat Whataburger, that would be a little different. That's a majoritarianism the way he's seeing it. People are allowed to dissent. That's the thing. Dissent, I think, is needed in a society.
If the majority of people tell you that The Shawshank Redemption is a good movie, and it is, you watch it. Why can't you trust the majority to pick the right political candidate? Because
many times people will say something's really good and you don't like it. I don't like the TV show The Office. Most people like that show. I didn't like the TV show Scrubs. A lot of people like that show too. There's probably stuff that I like that a lot of people think is awful that a lot of people like. Some people don't like the Big Bang Theory, which was the #1 show for a very long time. There's hate groups for the Big Bang Theory. Just because the majority likes something doesn't mean it's the best. It just means that most people like it.
That candidate sucks, okay? Well, that's just your opinion, man. But you like people to know your opinion, don't you? You like your voice to be heard? That smells like democracy to me. Literally every other election in the country is done by a majority vote. Heck,
Actually, this is somewhat true because the president and vice president both are. But if you look at every other election in the country, the president and the vice president are the only offices that are elected by the entire country. Every other election is by either state by state or by district. Every senator and governor is elected in one state only, which is the same size as the state voting for a president. Every representative is just by districts. And if you look at California, they have 55 electoral votes, but that's 53 congressional districts. I mean, so they are broken down. Every other election's broken down into smaller pieces, but you're saying this one shouldn't be broken down into smaller pieces.
Electoral college defenders are even cool with the majority of electoral votes being counted. So, what about the mob? Well, mobs can be irrational. Mobs can be violent. We saw this on January 6th when a mob tried to overturn a, election. But governments literally can also be violent and irrational. But governments are made up of people. Getting rid of the Electoral College doesn't mean we'd have mob rule.
It doesn't mean we'd have mob rule. I agree. It's just a protection against having mob rule. And one part of the big reason why they put it in was because of the way the French Revolution started going, which happened after the American Revolution, but kind of, I think, a little bit before the Constitution was created, is that they didn't like, all these, the mob just going crazy and chopping people's heads off and everything. And the problem with mob rule is that it can cause a lot of people do things in the mob that they wouldn't do otherwise. That's how riots happen. Most people wouldn't individually throw a rock through a storefront. When they start seeing other people throw rocks through storefronts, they kind of start doing it. And there was a lot more riot-wise and mob-wise than just this one event on January 6th that he's highlighting. But that's neither here nor there. That's why you don't want a mob ruling things. You want more. The mob can be irrational. I mean, remember that at one point in time, the majority thought that slavery was either a good thing or there was no issue with it. The first country to abolish slavery was Haiti in 1804, and it only did so because it became a country through a slave revolt. So if you're saying, well, if the majority's right, well, the majority was wrong on slavery. In Germany, the majority backed the Nazi Party. They were wrong. So there's nothing wrong with having a few safeguards against the majority always having their way.
Or a tyranny of the majority, we'd still live in a constitutional republic, so the law would rule over all else. And
except there's plenty of occasions where presidents went against the Constitution. Andrew Jackson did it like 3 or 4 times alone, and various other presidents did too. So you can't say, well, the Constitution will protect us if the mob doesn't want it. And if you can overturn the Electoral College, why couldn't you just overturn everything else in the Constitution?
representatives would still make major decisions. It's an indirect democracy, so there'd still be safeguards against mobs. But maybe you're still worried about minorities not having a voice. Well, majoritarianism doesn't mean the minority has no voice. There are still plenty of safeguards for the minority. Take, the entire U.S. Constitution, which spells out the limited powers of the federal government. And even
as we see, those limits kind of get bigger and bigger, and even with the Constitution spelling out limits, there was a lot of things in the Constitution at times that have been basically ignored. There's been multiple sedition acts that were passed that basically voided the First Amendment. African Americans were denied their rights under the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment for 100 years in the South. So you can't just say, well, the Constitution will always protect us, because if you have people in government that really don't care to protect you, it's not going to protect you.
and lists out specific individual rights every citizen has. For example, religious minorities in the United States are protected. Ethnic minorities in the United States even often get special treatment, for crying out loud.
Yes, but there was a time when ethnic minorities weren't protected. There's a time when some religious minorities really weren't all that protected either. Things can change. That's why you need these protections put in.
Minorities can be mobs too. Oh no, here's the mob of Electoral College defenders furiously typing about how wrong I am. According to the mob of Electoral College defenders, even though they are a minority, they are the best mob to represent us. Okay.
The minority doesn't create a mob. All the Electoral College does is if there's some defect in the election, a pretty big one, they will keep it from going to a candidate that doesn't have appeal across the whole country. Which he's really not even getting into that much so far. We're 8 minutes in. I mean, 2 of the 4 times that the Electoral College did not go to the candidate that won the most popular votes, it overturned what was rampant cheating in the South, which allowed Grover Cleveland in 1888 and Samuel Tilden in 1876 to win the popular vote because they denied hundreds of thousands of black people the right to vote, maybe even millions in the South that would have, at that time, voted for the Republican candidate that would have protected them. So, I mean, you can really say that you can be upset about Al Gore and Hillary Clinton losing, even though Gore's entire majority, I believe, was in one county in California, and Hillary Clinton's was in a few counties in California. But that's because there wasn't broad appeal across the whole country, which is what the Electoral College wants. It wants you to appeal to, wants a candidate that can appeal to everybody. And it forces a majority within the Electoral College to win. You know, one of the majority in the Electoral College, it then goes into the House of Representatives, which, so if he likes majoritarianism, the Electoral College actually does at least force that, because if you didn't have an Electoral College, you could have a dozen candidates running, and someone winning 10% of the vote, or maybe even a little less, could become president.
Okay, enough about mobs. I did get a lot of people defending what Steven Crowder actually meant when he said that the United States was never a democracy.
The United States has never been a democracy.
When Crowder made the statement that the United States is not a democracy, that's because it isn't. And when Mr. Beat says that Crowder is claiming that we don't have democracy, it's because he's not listening to words. Crowder never said that.
Crowder meant America has never been a direct democracy. That is pretty clear. Assuming this is coming at me in good faith, and
It actually is coming at you in good faith. I don't know if you didn't watch the whole Crowder video or heard this argument before, but when they say we're not a democracy, we're a republic, that's what we're talking about. This is not moving the goalpost. Moving the goalpost is if you put up an argument, someone defeats the argument, so then you put up a new argument. And I've gotten into that a lot with people online. You'll say, for example, I had someone say, well, such and such said this, like they try to say Eisenhower said something racist to, who was it, Earl Warren. And I'm like, where's your witnesses? Where's your proof that he said these things? I'm like, if you only have Earl Warren's word and Eisenhower was dead by the time he said it, where's your proof? And the person didn't have the proof. Like, well, he could have did more for African Americans. Then I said what he did do, and it's like, well, he could have did more than that. Like they said, oh, he didn't do nothing for them. And I said, well, he did this. He said, well, he could have did more. They kept moving the goalpost because I kept defeating their argument. This is not moving the goalpost. This is explaining the argument that someone else made.
not attempting to move the goalpost. I apologize for misrepresenting Crowder there. I do agree with Crowder here that the United States has never had a direct democracy. Well, except for referendums and recall elections.
The things he's talking about, like with referendums and recall elections, those are not on a federal level. Like the recall of Gavin Newsom was a state recall. Referendums are state referendums. A lot of places you vote on property taxes on a local school district level. But on the federal level, there's never been a direct democracy. The closest thing would really be when states ratify an amendment to the Constitution, but that's still a state-by-state basis. So you don't have a direct democracy on the federal level. And if you watch his first video, it doesn't sound like he even understands that at all when he's making his argument. He tries to make the people that are for keeping the keeping the Electoral College sound really dumb in that video, which is probably why he gets some of the negative comments that he does. And with the funny voices here, he's kind of making them sound silly, rather saying it in a regular voice.
But that's at the local and state levels. So yeah, at the federal level, Crowder is right, and I agree that we shouldn't have direct democracy at the federal level.
Well, if we shouldn't have direct democracy at the federal level, you've now just agreed to keeping the Electoral College, because it would be direct democracy at the federal level.
By the way, much of the criticisms of my original video were examples of the straw man fallacy.
The straw man fallacy is when you take someone's argument and make an easily defeatable argument. Saying which founding father favored direct democracy is not a straw man argument at all, because it's literally asking the question. I was hoping I'd be convinced, but direct democracy has just as many flaws as Electoral College does. Not a straw man argument. There's typical leftist minorities saying minorities should have no voice in the president. Which other minorities do you think should have a voice? By the way, direct democracy is tyranny of the majority. Think about that statement before you try to spout your inclusiveness. Well, you could kind of argue that that might be slightly toward a straw man fallacy. You're saying that they say minorities should have no voice in voting for the president, which really isn't what they're saying. They're just saying that it should always go to whoever gets the most popular vote. So the third one, he has a point that it's kind of a straw man a little bit, but it ain't a complete straw. Straw man is when you take someone's argument, just boil it down. Like when he kept saying if you watch the first, he keeps having the pub say, but we're a republic, with a funny voice like that. That is a straw man fallacy, because he's making the entire argument that's put out there, narrowing it down to one thing and trying to go against that silly, what he thinks is a silly argument. That's the straw man, not these choices. Except you could say a little bit about the third one, but I was asking the point, what other minorities do you think shouldn't have a voice?
They were attacking a straw man. I never once called for a direct democracy to replace our constitutional republic.
You did call for direct democracy. You actually kind of were calling for a direct democracy because you wanted the president to be only elected through direct democracy. So it's not a direct democracy that the people would. It's because you didn't understand what a direct democracy was, because you thought it was a republic that's with democratic elected leaders, which you weren't calling for. So yeah, I guess you're right there. You didn't call for direct democracy, but you were using the term wrong. That's the issue. And that's confusing for people. But I don't see most of those as straw man arguments.
I just think we should vote for president, the same way we vote for literally every other public office. And
we do. We vote on it on a state-by-state basis. Everyone doesn't vote on every senator, and then whatever the 100 highest total senators across the whole country are put in the Senate. You vote on a state-by-state basis. Then those state votes are put together via the Electoral College to pick a president. Plus, that everyone else is doing an argument is not a very good argument because, once again, until 1804, every other country in the world was doing slavery.
In this country. Speaking of logical fallacies, there were also several faulty appeal to authority fallacy comments. The problem with utopian theorists is that they expect a perfect world. The founding were far more ahead to their contemporaries, and most of their ideas are still very relevant now.
This is not a faulty appeal to authority, because they're appealing to the founders who wrote the document. A faulty appeal to authority would be like when he found in the first video, he found another YouTuber that didn't like the Electoral College either. And he kept pointing to that guy, saying, well, this guy too. Like if, for example, I found a history professor or maybe a constitutional lawyer of constitutional law that said that agreed with me, and I said, well, they say this should be this way. This guy's a constitutional lawyer, so it must be correct. That's a faulty appeal to authority, not saying, well, this is what the founders wanted. So realistically, he's got this one wrong. It's not a faulty appeal to authority when you're pointing to the people that actually wrote the document. Faulty appeal to authority is pointing to a third party person and saying, well, they're an authority, so you have to follow what they say.
Now and in the future. Yes, there's things to improve on, but what the founding fathers did is just awesome. It's done its purpose for over 200 years. Don't change it because you're mad you didn't get the result you wanted.
The founders set it up that way for a reason.
Well, the second one here says, don't remove it. It's done its purpose for over 200 years. Who is he appealing to as an authority on that one? That one don't even fit his own thing. Once again, it's the founders. And they're appealing to the founding fathers. They're not appealing to a third party person. But even the second one, he has on the bottom of the page here, it doesn't appeal to anybody that you could consider an authority.
And people that don't like the Electoral College think they are smarter than the founders. I think those very smart people should change in the Senate too. Why should all the states get only 2 senators?
Founding fathers this and founding fathers that. It's a faulty appeal to authority fallacy because people are saying the Electoral College must be good because the founding fathers believed it was good.
Except they're the ones that made it. That's not the faulty appeal. The faulty appeal would be like, okay, I have these constitutional lawyers over here that exist in today's time that say it's good or say it's bad, so they must be right. Saying that the person that created it thought it was good, of course they did.
But the founding fathers didn't have access to the same information we do today. No offense to the founding fathers, but you watching this video right now are likely much more informed than they ever were. Plus, if the founding fathers were around today, do you really think they would have the exact same views about the Electoral College?
I actually do think that they would. Now, he's going to point to something here that doesn't, but I think they would because the idea of it was to protect the small states from the big states. And since there's an even bigger gap now in the size of states as far as population, they would actually probably be in favor of it more than they were. There wasn't any states with 40 or 50 electoral votes when they created the electoral college against states with 3 votes. So it's a lot closer. So the protection would be, they would see this being needed more now today than what it was at the time, which I think the biggest state maybe, and I'm not even sure, had 30 electoral votes.
Read Anti-Federalist Paper number 72, by the way.
Democracy does not exist on the federal level, but it does exist on the state level. To clarify, we don't have a national election, there are 50 separate state elections.
Which is 100% correct. We don't have a national election for any office in this country, but he wants to make a special one.
Because again, the United States is a republic.
The United States is a republic.
The best argument is that it prevents the possibility of having a nationwide recount, which would be a headache and allow for corruption easily. With basically 50 separate state elections, we only need recounts in at most 1 or 2 states.
That's actually a really good argument. Because would you really want a Florida level thing happening again and say the whole country? I think that's actually a pretty good analogy there. Looks like the biggest state, I actually went back and checked, was New York with 20 actually 10. Virginia, Pennsylvania had 10, Massachusetts had 10. New York, for some reason, didn't get any votes. And so, like, I'm saying 20 here, but everyone got 2 electoral votes at that time. So, yeah, 10 electoral votes was the most at the time. 3 was the least when they did the first election. So, yeah, they would have seen, the difference between 10 electoral votes and 3 electoral votes isn't very much. The difference between 55 electoral votes and 3 is much bigger. They would favor electoral college today.
But you can still have 50 separate elections without the Electoral College. Federalism doesn't have to be put aside to reform how we elect the president and vice president.
Okay, but here's the thing, though. If you're having just a popular vote win, you'd have to look at all the votes together across state. So if it was really close for some reason, I think Florida was the 1% difference was what it was in Florida. Anything under 1%, which we have had elections that were that close, it would trigger a recount of the entire country, not just 1 or 2 states. So he's not really, saying anything that goes against the argument that the other person said.
In fact, did you know that federal elections are already incredibly decentralized? Most states report election results at the precinct level, which is a small area in which all voters go to a single polling place to vote. Spoken like a true socialist, democracy appears nowhere in the Constitution. Communists chose not to read it like yourself. So what? The word privacy isn't in the Constitution. There's nothing about political parties in there, nothing about contraceptive.
Well, that guy made just a really bad comment, so he shouldn't even be responding to it. Like, some people make comments that are so bad you shouldn't be responding to them, especially in a video. And that video had hundreds of comments. I put a really well thought out comment. He doesn't get to it in this because I do remember that much when I watched it the first time.
Or abortion, nothing about corporations or labor unions. So much of what we get out of the Constitution these days is implied, not literally in the text, and it's been that way since at least 1819. It protects the minority states from majority states. Imagine living in Kansas State and there is a vote that New York and Kansas had to vote on a law that would change your lifestyle. If you're Kansas, you're screwed. That username though. Anyway, no. With a popular vote, every vote is equal. Also, every person in one state doesn't vote the same way. And if anything, borders are becoming increasingly meaningless when it comes to cultural differences. The federal government is not supposed to govern individuals. States are supposed to govern as individual nations.
That is actually how it was first envisioned, that each state would be like its own nation. And the federal government was kind of like a big umbrella over. I think when the United Kingdom was first set up, it was set up that way as well.
The federal government is supposed to govern between states. The only reason that people think this whole argument makes sense is because the federal government has its slimy tentacles in way too many areas of individual life.
Once again, these weird voices are kind of ad hominem attacks. Like the last guy said, notice the guy's name when it was National Socialist. That's an ad hominem because you're saying, okay, you're arguing against his name rather than what he says.
Yeah, it's a good argument, although it still feels a bit post hoc. Then again, this comment seems to be from someone stuck in 1787. As many
Someone stuck in 1787. Once again, that's an ad hominem.
the Electoral College defenders often apparently are. Can someone send these guys a time machine? We ought to look at the Electoral College through the lens of 2022. It's not the 1780s anymore, okay?
But we are looking at it through the lens of 2022, though. That's the thing. Why should California and New York get to decide who the president is in every single election? Not because they have a good cross-section of the population, but because they have the most people.
Now, at the root of my argument against the Electoral College is that the president ought not represent the states, but the people.
The people are made up of states. I mean, states are made up of people, though. Like, the fact is that if you just go pure, straight vote, he's not going to represent the people in the small states because there's not just going to be enough of them for their issues to matter. If you live and you're going to be basically going to look at what's best for people in the cities, they're going to push those things, and because that's where the population is. They're not going to look at what's in the best interest of everyone else.
Presidency, well, the executive branch as a whole, has rapidly become nationalized since the founding of the Republic. The federal government has tremendous influence over our lives and greatly supersedes state power. Sure, this wasn't always the case, but over time, especially over the past 100 years, the federal government has had more and more of an active role in the lives of Americans. And the courts have mostly been okay with such an increase of federal power. Now, you can disagree with that, fine, but you need to accept the reality which we're living in. Not only that, states depend heavily on the federal government these days.
Because the government takes people's money and has to give them back somewhere. If the taxes were done on the state level instead of the federal level, you wouldn't have the dependency. Just because the federal government has increased its power doesn't mean that we need to make a change somewhere.
For example, West Virginia gets 45% of its revenue from federal sources. Yeah, it'd be screwed without the federal government. And yeah.
But where does that money come from? People that live in the states. Basically, the government takes the money and it grants some of it back to the states, not all of it.
I know the founders generally wanted the states to elect the president, not the people directly. I know, okay? I teach this for a living. But that can change. We can change that. And as I said it in my previous video, a lot has happened since 1787. We have telegraphs now. The people should elect the president. Would that give the president even more power than they have now? Absolutely not. And anyone who has made that claim has yet to provide evidence to back that up.
When has anyone made that claim? It's like he's arguing against the claim I've never heard. And there's several good claims that he doesn't argue against.
I was a bit surprised at how many Electoral College defenders loved the fact that every vote was not counted equally. And the reason why small pop votes are worth more than big pop votes is an attempt to even out the votes between big pop states and small pop states. So in reality, if you want to end the Electoral College, that means you want big pop states to have all the power. The most of the American populace are within California, New York, and Texas. Cali and New York has more people than Texas. Boom! Democrats have complete and utter power over who is made president. That's a pretty fascist thought to want to have all opposing voices to your party silenced.
The fact is that if you look at the way the representative works, first off, it's not based off of, they don't give representatives in Congress based off of how many people vote. It's based off of total population. It's not even based off of eligible voters. So states like California, Texas, Florida, and New York have a much higher percentage of their population that is ineligible to vote. That's why I actually did it on his other video because his example was Kansas and Texas. Like he said, well, Kansas has less people voting per elector. That's not fair. But Texas has less people voting. He said Kansas has less people per electoral vote represented. He didn't even look at per vote. He looked at per total population. But if you look at representatives in the House based on population that voted in the 2016 election, which is what he used at the time because his first video, 2018, Texas had more representatives per voter than Kansas did in the House of Representatives, which is every election, every 2 years, they get that advantage, and it does make a difference having an extra representative here and there, whereas Kansas had a little bit more representatives per elector, a little more representation per elector for the president, but it's only really made a difference a few times. I mean, there's only 4 times in a 230 plus year period where the electoral college did not match up with the popular vote. So it's not something that's happening all the time.
First of all, Florida has more people than New York. Second,
that's pretty recent that Florida has more people than New York. In the previous census that was done, New York had more people than Florida. Just to put that out there.
Still think everyone deserves to have their voice heard equally. If you are for the Electoral College, you're okay with some people's voices being louder than others.
But like, as I said, though, they don't base representation in the House of Representatives off of eligible voters. They base it off of people living within a state. So if you're for counting people for representation within a state that can't vote, then you're the other way around. And if you actually put that out there, nobody who is against the electoral college wants to change that part of the equation because those big states tend to vote one certain way. They want to leave it that way.
You're okay with inequality. When you say big states like California and Texas will have all the power without the Electoral College, no, they won't.
They generally would because there's so many votes in those big states that they would drown out all the smaller states. I mean, I think there's actually more electoral votes in California than all the 3-vote and 4-vote states combined.
Because, as Electoral College defenders also say, remember, it's the Electoral College that makes it that states vote, not people. If people's individual votes are counted instead, it won't freaking matter what state they live in. Did you know that there are Democrats in Alabama and Republicans in Massachusetts?
But it would kind of make those big states have all the voice, though, because those 4 big states, plus if you throw in, say, Pennsylvania and and Illinois and a few other of the Midwestern states, you probably make a list of about 10 to 12 states that would control every election. If someone could somehow find a way to win all of those, or even if they just won most of them. So, but it basically does, it puts a little bit more power into the small states, so issues to people living in those states still matter. Because who would care about what's going on in the Dakotas, Montana, Idaho, Kansas, Nebraska, Utah, Iowa, or any of the other small states where the population is dispersed out over a big area, when you could really harvest a lot of votes in Texas or in California.
If you get rid of the Electoral College, they'd actually be heard for the very first time.
They are actually heard, though. That's the thing. If you take a state for granted too long, and he picks two here, which haven't changed for a while, but at one point in time, Alabama was solidly Democrat. In fact, Jimmy Carter won Alabama. Alabama hasn't voted Democrat since, but up to that point when Jimmy Carter won it, Democrats won it just about every election. Massachusetts used to be the other way. It wasn't until Kennedy come along that Massachusetts started really going Democrat a lot. It used to go mostly Republican. So, I mean, states changed. Georgia just flipped. Virginia was Republican for a while, then it flipped back Democrat. In fact, Virginia was the only former Confederate state that didn't vote for Jimmy Carter in 1976, and it voted for Obama twice, and I think it voted for Biden and even Hillary Clinton. So states can change, so your voice in them states does matter to a point, but the fact is that if you lived in Alabama, your voice wouldn't matter that much because people aren't going to go to Alabama to hear what you have to say. They'll hit Atlanta and Georgia as they're going down towards Florida after hitting the big cities in the Northeast. Then it'll be off to Texas. Then you'll hit the West Coast.
In presidential elections. And again, I am saying all this as a person who benefits from the Electoral College, meaning if you live in Florida, your vote is currently counted way less right now than my vote here in Kansas.
But he's not going by total votes cast. He's going by the census. And as I said, since there's a lot of immigrants in Florida and not very many immigrants in Kansas, there's a lot of people that count towards representation. And in his equation, that aren't voters. They aren't even eligible to vote.
Stop trying to make it seem like I am better than you. I am not. In conclusion, if the Electoral College is so good, why is it that not one other country in the entire world has implemented it like we do?
This is the everyone else is doing an argument. I mean, every country had slavery at one point. Also, if you look at the way other countries elect their leaders, you really don't want to emulate that. The country with the biggest population in the entire world is China. What's China have? A communist dictatorship, which is probably the type of government that the most people in the world live underneath. Look at countries that have parliamentary systems like Britain and Canada. You know how the parliament works? You elect what's basically a House of Representatives. Then the House of Representatives picks who the leader is. So they don't even get to even pick at all who's going to be the president. They vote for a representative, and those representatives elect a prime minister. So they're far less direct than the United States is. Plus, a lot of countries are a lot smaller than the United States. Think about a country that's, say, the size of, let's just throw one out there, France, which is one of the bigger countries in Europe. It's less than the size of Texas. I mean, so it's kind of like electing a governor at that point. If we were the size of France, yeah, it wouldn't make sense. When you have a big country over a wide area, it makes a much more of a difference to elect via an electoral college. And I think there might be another state that does it anyway. I'm not sure. But a lot of these countries have chancellors and prime ministers and stuff like that. They're not elected directly by the people anyway. We have a much more direct election of our leader than those other countries do. Don't forget the dictators. Or the few countries that still have kings and queens running them. And there are some countries that are still ruled by kings and queens. They don't have any choice at all. The people who have prime ministers have very little choice because they're elected by the what's basically the equivalent of our House of Representatives. So, yeah, there's some countries that might have a system that looks better, but they're much smaller, and and even then there might be issues too, because a lot of these countries that have elections are so fraudulent that they don't have a choice anyway because the ballot box is stuffed so ridiculously bad that it's a fraudulent election.
As it turns out, and I cannot stress this enough, Electoral College defenders actually like democracy. They think it's great. They like ordinary people like you and me having power and having a voice. They want to be heard. In fact, they are having their voices heard right now. Look at them type away, bless their hearts. So those talking points again, eh? Haven't heard that one before.
He says talking points, but really he generally has one talking point, which is it's not as democratic because the person with the most votes doesn't always win. That's his talking point. But if you look at it otherwise, he doesn't really, like it limits corruption. It limits the idea of a really bad candidate winning because you have to win a vast majority of the country. You can't have someone like, say, George Wallace in 1968 win with 13.5% of the vote because you're not going to have that, because you're only going to have two major parties, because you have to get a full majority. You can't win on one small region of the country. You can't win on appealing to a small percentage of the population. It eliminates cheating. It also helps if there does have to be a recount, that it doesn't have to go everywhere. It also lends legitimacy to the president who does win because they have to win a majority in the Electoral College. Which if you went by straight popular vote, like he's saying, it wouldn't necessarily be a majority because you could have 10 candidates running, someone could win 10 to 12% of the vote. So there's a lot of good things about the Electoral College. It lends credence to the candidate that does win. It assures an electoral majority. It insulates against cheating because there's no point in cheating in a state that's a safe state. It eliminates that, but plus it's easier to watch where cheating might happen then. And like I said, there's a lot of good things about it that he never answers on his thing. He only answers mob rule, which he kind of doesn't get because he thinks that people are saying that mob rule will happen without it. They're just saying it's a safeguard against it. And it's more democratic not to, which is really the only thing they ever say. And he does this, saying things are ad hominem attacks that really aren't ad hominem attacks. And saying they're moving to goalposts, all these different types of attacks. But he's also picking and choosing and cherry picking the very worst comments that he has to go against.
Our constitutional republic should favor the majority of us.
It does favor the majority. You have to still win a majority in the Electoral College, and the candidate that wins the most popular votes wins almost all the time.
Minority rule really is horrible. I've heard
it's not minority rule. It's not like the Electoral College is constantly electing presidents that of the minority against the majority. It's happened 4 times, twice. If there hadn't been rampant cheating, the popular vote would have fit back in the 1800s. So really, you're talking about 2 times where you didn't get your way. So you want to change the rules.
Heard your arguments to keep the Electoral College for 4 years now, but every single one of your arguments is, and no offense, so weak and predictable that they're kind of boring at this point.
Except you don't go over most of the good arguments. You pick and choose the worst arguments. If any argument's predictable and boring, it's really but it's more democratic to have a straight popular vote. That's the weak argument because once you're shown why there's reasons for the Electoral College, other than that, you never change your argument.
It's not that I don't understand how presidential elections were supposed to go. I do. It's that how they were supposed to go sucks, and it needs to change. Again, no, this doesn't mean I want a direct democracy. I want a true...
Well, people say they don't want... But the way you were talking, you didn't understand the difference between a democracy. When you say democracy that way as a form of government, when people say we're talking about democracy, they meant a direct democracy. You didn't understand that.
True representative democracy.
You're talking about like a republic with democratically elected leaders, which is what we have now.
But there is overwhelming evidence right now that the federal government is not truly representative of what the majority of Americans want. That said, over the years, I have become less rigid on my opinions about the Electoral College, mostly from hearing from Electoral College defenders. And so I am willing to compromise. At the very least, I want every state to divide up their electoral votes by districts, just like Maine and Nebraska does.
Okay, here's the thing though. This is a state by state choice. If you don't like it, you have to lobby for that in the individual states. And the problem there is that California doesn't want to divide its electoral votes up by district for the very simple reason that the Democrats run the whole state and they don't want any of their electoral votes going to Republicans. And Texas is the same way on the opposite side. They don't want any of their electoral votes going to the Democrats, so neither side does it. They could do that in the Electoral College. The problem is I don't think it would have maybe even made much of a difference because you would be swapping electoral votes other ways. But this is a state issue, though. This isn't a federal issue. This is something the states get to decide how they award electoral votes. They all decided to do it via popular vote, and all but two of them decided to do winner take all. So some states it would make sense because they're not swing states. But for swing states, you're better off gathering them all together, or even really small states. Like, for example, Wyoming, even if they did that, they'd still would all go to the same person because there's only one district. If you have two districts like Maine, 3/4 of them are going to go.
Does. Can we at least get that?
But then again, it's more fun to complain about things than actually find a solution.
Well, I just offered a solution, but additionally,
But you didn't offer a solution in your first video. That's the thing. This guy's replying to your first video, not what you just said.
I think we should implement either star voting or ranked choice voting on top of that to make the presidential elections more representative.
These are actually both bad because what happens is if you look at, say, the ranked choices, we're going to look at the ranked choice on the right-hand side. Let's say your first choice, let's say candidate F is the candidate that gets the least amount of votes. What do they do after that? They kick him out of the election, and your vote goes to a candidate you didn't vote for. It goes to your second choice. And if that's not the person you wanted, it goes to your third choice or your fourth choice, and so on and so forth, until they get down to two people, most likely. So your voting's really being taken away from who you voted for and given to another candidate to try to make some sort of majority. And it's the same thing with star voting. They're taking away your basic preference because you're not like on the one on the left. If Carmen is the fifth choice, Carmen's votes all go out the window, and then your votes go elsewhere. So ranked choice and star voting aren't very good. Plus, the star voting thing I think might even be kind of confusing to some people. But I think they're also going to be the people that think that, let's just say, because it was the last election, Biden and Trump, they like one and don't like the other. Well, the candidate you don't like is going to get 0 stars, which is like Blake. The candidate they like the most is going to get, of those two big ones, is going to get either 4 or 5 stars. Let's say this is the thing. The top guy's either a Democrat or a Republican. The second one's either a Democrat or Republican. And all these other people are the third-party candidates. Well, they really hate the candidate from one party, so they give Blake a 0 because they just don't like him. Then they give Andre a 4 because they want to make sure there's at least a large amount of separation. Even if they wouldn't generally give those candidates a 4 and a 0, they want that separation because they really dislike, the Blake, who they put worse. So they're going to give Andre, who they probably would only give a 1 or a 2, a 4, just so there's a big gap. That way it puts more value to that, so it's a bigger gap from who they think is going to be first and second. That's where star voting can become pretty bad. And then they like Carmen the best. They had Carmen a 5 star. That's who they would really want. Carmen's the candidate, let's say, for the Green Party. Let's say that's the way they like to vote. And the 4 star, let's say that's a socialist candidate. I can't think of another party name. Let's say the 1 star is libertarian. They don't like libertarianism. That's how they voted. So the bottom 3 are honest, but the top 2 maybe aren't so honest because they really want to make sure that they're putting a big distance between the two candidates they think is going to be the two candidates. So yeah, these two types of voting really aren't that good. Plus the other side of the coin is we already have primaries where you have several candidates run against one another and you get to pick which one you like the best then. And then the winners of the primaries run against each other in general elections. You already kind of have that runoff in a way because you've already eliminated it down to 2 candidates.
I've made videos on how those work, by the way. And if you still don't agree with that, let your voice be heard. by commenting below. And if you do want to get rid of the Electoral College or reform it, let me know by hitting that like button. You know, it's almost as if you are voting on this video.
Which is funny though, because he complains about people downvoting him as voting against his video, but he wants you to upvote him, which I don't think you should downvote unless it's a really bad video. I generally don't. I actually put some comments down here that has pretty much been ignored by most people. And these comments were 2 months ago. So this video must come out about 2 months ago, 3 months ago. Thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and have a great day.